All right, so there's been the election of a new Trump administration with new policies. A lot of those policies focus on traditional energy like fossil fuels, but there's also support for nuclear and carbon capture and storage. Jim, you've written an article about how things might be under that new administration. One of the things that you've said in the article is that advanced batteries and EVs are driven by technology shifts and not just policy, that political leadership affects pace but not direction. Now, the political shifts won't stop this technology from being adopted, but it could slow it down. I want to open the discussion into how you see the current policies affecting clean tech innovation and adoption.
The current policies, meaning what Trump is going to do, that's anybody's guess what Trump is going to do. There is a difference between political rhetoric and policy. And we know what the political rhetoric has been. If you take it all literally, it's a little bit frightening. But for example, his nominee to be the Secretary of Energy, fellow from out of the oil and gas industry who was sort of derided climate change, but is nevertheless an MIT electrical engineer and says that he's sort of a technology junkie. I think that that's not necessarily bad news for the electric vehicle community or the battery community, because quite frankly, technology is moving in our direction. And as long as the new administration may not continue the level of support that we've seen for the last 4 years for electric vehicles and batteries, but as long as they're not affirmatively trying to hobble the technology, as long as they're not trying to become the Luddites of the carbon age, I think we can deal with people that respect technology. The electrification of transportation is nearly inevitable for a number of different reasons. It's simple, it's efficient, it's less expensive ultimately when you get farther down the learning curve. I do believe that our grandchildren will look back and marvel at how it was that we ever developed a infrastructure based on the internal combustion engine. I mean, it's amazingly complex. I mean, think of it back in 2019. If somebody were selling an automobile and a guy comes to you and says, I can't believe that this thing's ever going to work, where do you get the gasoline for it? You got to go to the drugstore, can buy it by the pint, and what if they're out? And you said to that fellow, well, I've got this vision in my mind that one day we're going to have millions of miles of pipelines snaking under the ground everywhere. We're going to have these fleets of tanker trucks going that last mile delivery, going all over the roads. We're going to have gas stations, fueling stations on every corner where people can fill up their car. And just to make it really beautiful, when you see these cars, which themselves are these convoluted engineering designs that need 27 different fluids, hundreds of moving parts just to operate, we're going to take the children and we're going to sit them on back on top of the fuel tank of 20 gallons of highly flammable liquid. That's my vision for the future. They would have locked you up into the insane asylum if you said that that was actually going to work. Electrification is simple by comparison. Many fewer moving parts, just less to make the vehicle grow. You don't need pipelines that need to be maintained and cleaned. You need electric wires that can be strung almost anywhere. So, and plus, of course, you have the electric motor, which was 3 times, 5 times, I forget, the efficiency of the internal combustion engine. Electrification of vehicles is coming, but electrification of just about everything else is as well. I do believe we're entering the age of the electron, where we're seeing truly a shift in the fuel that will power human society, or primarily power human society. Largely that shift is occurring because of the semiconductor chip, not really the battery. Everything's becoming a computer, and computers don't run well on gasoline. So this is something that is going to continue. The cost curve is going to continue to come down. And as long as no one gets in the way, it may take longer, it may take shorter, depending upon government incentive and government backing. But the end result is going to be the same. This is an industry that's going to thrive. This is a technology that must thrive, because it is the one way you can get electrons to anywhere in space and time that you need them. You need a battery to do that. If you can't power it with a wire, you got to power it with a battery.
Well, thank you for that wonderful answer. So I had a question about a statement you made about if no one gets in the way. And to preface that question, Michael and I took a fantastic trip to mainland China this summer, and we saw with our own eyes how that country has just completely transformed its transportation. We took the high-speed rail everywhere in the major cities. There were electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. Basically, those were almost the majority of cars that we saw. And looking at the statistics for that country, more than half of new vehicle sales are now electric vehicles, or what they call new energy vehicles. And we found out through talking to people there that there are a lot of incentives or incentivization, not necessarily in the form of direct subsidies or payments to buyers, but just it's cheaper to register an electric car versus a gasoline vehicle. Conversely, in the United States, they have sort of perverse or inverse incentives. Some states charge more to register an electric vehicle than a gasoline vehicle. And so one of the questions I think we have is, you know, in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act and the incentives set out in that bill, which are very good and very comprehensive, what are potential risks or areas of incentivization that the Trump administration might target for whatever political reason or economic reason?
I think there's a lot of people anticipate that the 30D tax credit, that $7,500 tax credit that individuals can get for buying an electric vehicle, is probably on the chopping block. Even Elon Musk is okay with seeing it go, largely because Ford and GM and Tesla competitors are far more dependent upon that consumer credit than Tesla is. Its vehicles are generally of higher price. So again, I think that we're likely to see a lot of the incentives for electric vehicles be repealed. The real question in my mind and the fear in my mind, to the extent I have a fear, is that they will go farther than that. They will start imposing additional fees on vehicle electrification to try to affirmatively push consumers back to the internal combustion vehicle. That would be more of a problem. But I think that may be difficult for them to do. One thing one has to say about the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and how it was administered by the Biden administration is that the large majority of the funds that were invested in new manufacturing for these technologies in North America were put into red states, into states where the governors have a particular ability to influence the new administration and will likely defend what they rightfully see as a source of potential major economic growth for their communities. So I don't think that the Trump administration is going to be quite as disruptive to vehicle electrification as many may fear. Again, anything's possible. Part of what I think has people nervous about Trump is no one really does know what to expect, probably not even Trump himself. So, but we're going to have to see. But at the end of the day, we've got the technological wind at our back. We've got economics working for us ultimately rather than against us. I don't think we're going to be China. China is a real interesting case. I've always thought there were really sort of three reasons China has made the huge investment it's made in electrification, which aren't really applicable to North America. One really being obviously environmental. They've got terrible air in China, and they really are worried about the health effects as they bring out a lot more internal combustion vehicles. But I think second was that when I first got into the area of transportation 20 years ago, what people were expecting to see out of China was the dreaded sub $10,000 car. They were going to put Detroit out of business because they were going to come in with an internal combustion vehicle that simply undercut anything that Detroit could produce on price. And they actually released that vehicle in Mexico. They couldn't get it approved for on safety basis in North America. But the Chinese quickly realized that they were so far behind in internal combustion vehicle technology that it was going to be a long uphill slog for them to dominate the automotive industry. So they decided that they would simply try to jump to the next technology, and that was electric. And that's where they decided to make their play. And the third reason, which I think we can't overlook, is the fact that, quite frankly, if we imported all of our oil and gas to the United States from the Middle East, and it was the Chinese Navy that controlled the trade routes on the oceans, we'd be investing a lot more in electric vehicles right now as well. And that's the position the Chinese really found themselves in, that they didn't want to be completely dependent upon the U.S. Navy for their economic success. And that was one possible solution. So I think those three things have pushed an awful lot of investment in the direction of China. They have not been similar drivers in the United States. Again, none of that affects the direction of the technology, but it does affect the pace. And the result of our underinvestment in this technology relative to the Chinese is that the Chinese are going to have a very real opportunity to dominate the automotive business of the 21st century in the same way that the United States dominated it in the 20th century. And that's what we will be losing if the new administration doesn't continue the investments in these vehicles. And that's where we really have to start thinking about what we're going to do to try to make sure that we don't lose that industry in the United States and in North America.